can I begin by adding my thanks to Anne, because, and also an apology to you, because this speech is supposed to be a lot more polished than it is. The other thing that I've got to apologise for is that I'm really watching the clock, because I have to get my train home, because my son is getting married in a couple of days. And I've got to go to the airport early tomorrow morning and collect some of his family. He's marrying a girl from Ghana. So there's like lots of a family that we haven't met, and people are arriving at the house all through this week, and it's really exciting. And they're sort of telling stories about Phyllis when she was little, and we're replying with stories about Joe when he was little. And it's really sort of brought home to me that we are the stories that we tell. We are the stories that we tell. And that's sort of the theme of this speech. But before I get into it, I thought I'd tell you a story to start with, just to sort of demonstrate that. And this is nothing to do with me, but it's someone that I've been thinking about recently. A guy called, and some of you may have heard of him, and I've forgotten his name, a guy called Henri Gustave Mollesson, who was an epileptic. He was born in the 1920s, 30s, I think, and he had quite severe epilepsy. And in 1953, he came to the attention of a surgeon, a neurosurgeon called Scoville. And he was in a really dire situation, and Scoville said, I'll sort this out. And this is the sort of zenith of surgical confidence. We had the map, we knew where everything in the brain worked, and Scoville was this sort of daredevil, absolutely confident Dr. Frankenstein character. I can sort this out. And he drove fast cars and took lots of risks, and he's an incredibly glamorous guy. So he made a trepanning drill. Does anyone know what trepanning is? It's not good, is it? Trepanning is... Has anyone ever done it? Just like I can just imagine Anne saying to you, you must say, don't try this at home. But it's when you drill a hole in your skull. I don't know how that habit started. Who was it who just sort of went... Anyway, he made a trepanning drill out of spare parts from his car. And he drilled 2 holes in Henry's skull, and he vacuumed out part of his hippocampus and cured him of his epilepsy. Absolutely fantastic, because Henry was going to die. This was going to kill him. He never, ever had an epileptic fit again. But he had no memory whatsoever of anything that happened up to the operation. He had no ability to form new memories. It just was completely gone. Every day was a brand new day to Henri Gustave Mollesson. And he became the most famous brain in the world because he was the perfect specimen. You could come and try any test you want, any neurological test you wanted. He wouldn't remember having done it before. He was really nice about it. It was all just fantastically exciting to him. And he had lots of sort of functional memory. He knew how to tie his laces. He knew how to come in, he knew his way around the hospital. But you could say something to him and he would completely not remember it 5 minutes later. He would eat lunch and then eat it again. And no ability whatsoever to form memories. Every now and then there were these terrible, sort of painful little flashes of insight. He said, somebody said to him, there was one surgeon who stayed with him, who studied him for 55 years. She was sort of his keeper. And she said to him once, you live and learn. And he said, no, you learn and I live. So he knew that there was something missing. And he developed, through habit, he was able to develop certain habits, certain sort of functions. So he had a little card in his wallet. And when he was sort of, occasionally he would be overwhelmed by a sense of loss and kind of loneliness. And he knew enough to take this card out of the wallet and read it. And it said, your dad is dead. And he would have to read that and that would remind him of it. I don't know, why am I telling you about this? He died in 2008. The body went straight from the hearse to an operating theatre. And his autopsy was streamed live on the internet. 53 hours of operation on the most fascinating brain in the world. And then it was cut into tiny slices like the ginger you have with sushi and kind of distributed around the world. And then it was reconstructed digitally, and you can look it up online. You can have a tour of his brain online. And Suzanne Corkin, who was the woman that I was talking about, who was his minder for all those years, 55 years, the only kind of real relationship he had in his life, she watched the autopsy. I don't know how weird that is. She watched his brain being, this guy that she worked with every day, she watched his brain being dissected and thought it was fantastic. So why am I talking to you about that? I can't remember now. Because Henri Gustave Mollesson was a man with no story. That's what we're like if we've got no story. That's what we become. And I think socially, that can happen as well. I think that occasionally we'll come back to this, but we're in danger of being a society that has that short-term memory. We can function fine, we can be charming, we can eat lunch, we can eat it again, but we don't know who we are, and we don't know what we're for. And I think that can happen, and I think it's storytellers who save us from that. Okay, so that's the end of that story. I'm a writer. I'm very, very proud of being a writer. I love being a writer. And I love it in the hairdressers or on a train when somebody says, "What do you do?" I always have that like, yeah. You know, like Matt Damon in True Grit when he goes, "Texas Ranger." Okay. I'm a writer. Okay? And then I fall for it every time because there's then that absolutely appalling moment when they go, "Written anything we'd know?" And for the last year, because I've been a writer all my life, but for the last year I've had an answer. I've actually had an answer. I wrote the Olympic opening ceremony. Eat that, more pervy. But it wasn't, and everyone's, people are really impressed. But that wasn't always the case. Like from the day that I started, people went. But when people said to me, "What are you working on now?" and I'd say the Olympic opening ceremony, almost without exception, people go, "I hear it's going to be crap." Like literally from the day I came home, like I bumped into Danny in Wardour Street like 2.5 years before, and he said, "Do you want a cup of tea?" which is really unusual. Because he's very abstemious. It'd be normally, "Would you like a glass of water?" There's a tap over there. And he said, "Do you want to do the opening ceremony?" And I came out glowing. I just instantly got how amazing this would be. And when I went home, everyone went, "Oh, why are you doing that?" And my agent was like, "Don't do that." And everyone said it was going to be rubbish. And as it built up, that kind of intensity of bad expectation really, really, really grew. I was like, "Are we wrong? Maybe we're just wrong." I remember, I would torment myself like everyone else. Because I'm the writer, I was really busy at the beginning and then it kind of tails off, whereas everyone else gets really busy after all your stupid ideas involve loads of work all of a sudden. "Hey, you could have a tree that came up out of the ground." Yeah, great. Yeah. My work here is done. Goodbye. Yeah, so I would torment myself by reading the Daily Mail and how particularly the letters page, and one letter really sticks in my mind. Somebody who said, "This is going to be the worst thing ever. It's going to be a global embarrassment from which this nation will never recover. I'm really glad it's happening in London, signed Paul Leeds." And that went on right into the ceremony. Giles, do you know this story? That Giles Corran filed a report saying it was the worst thing ever on the basis of having watched of sitting in the stadium while we were kind of revving up. He wrote this very witty report about how it was pump rock Teletubbies and it was a national embarrassment. And then 10 minutes later, he decided that this was the greatest night of his life and desperately got on the phone to the Times to try and pull it, but it had already gone out in certain areas. So he very graciously said, wrote in his report that depending where you live in the country, you're going to read this report saying it was dreadful, or you're going to read it saying, "This was the greatest night of my life." And he went really over the top, "If we don't win any medals, it doesn't matter because we had this." So it would be fantastic if you could just still sell tickets but lower expectations, because that's sort of what happened. And why did people think it was going to be rubbish? That was kind of like, why did people think it was going to be rubbish? Because when they tried to imagine what it would be, and I know this for a fact because we had meetings with ministers and this was what they thought it was going to be, they imagined it was going to be the Tudors, Churchill, Shakespeare, maybe the Romans, I don't know. Tudors, Shakespeare, Churchill, 2 world wars and 1 World Cup, basically. And that was their kind of view, basically. But that was what they thought it should be and what it would be, but they couldn't imagine why it would be good. And we discovered that the whole nation, collectively, had forgotten that they did the Industrial Revolution, that we invented the modern world. We've completely forgotten this as a nation. It's not really taught in schools. It's not anywhere culturally. And no one had ever kind of represented it as popular culture before the Industrial Revolution. Kind of amazing, you know? We are the stories we tell. And sometimes we get bogged down in stale old stories. And the writer's job is to question those stories and to change those stories and to remember the other stories, the stories that can be forgotten, and to put a new story in place of those dead, stale old stories. So, we are the stories. So that's right. So, after the Olympics, I got offered all kinds of mad things. I have no idea what Danny got offered. I know he got offered, have I got news for you? And he didn't do it. But I got offered crazy, crazy things. Did I want to come and organise Chavez's installation after he got elected president of Venezuela? And I didn't want to do it. I mean, there should be, there isn't, but I was going to, Ed wanted me to wear a yellow hard hat for this, because I took an oath that I would that anything involving wearing safety headgear and footwear was not writing, because that's all I've been doing for the last 2 years. But in fact, I ended up taking a gig doing a similar event, a mass participation event in Derry in Northern Ireland. And I did it for reasons of friendship, which is something I might talk about later. That's a friend asked me to do it. But I also did it because Derry's still a very divided city. And it's a city with two names, Derry or Londonderry, depending on which foot you kick with. Or indeed, if you work for the tourist board, it's called the Walled City. Or if you're a kind of modern, progressive, liberal type person, it could be called, like a modern, progressive, liberal, but Protestant, then it's called the Maiden City. So it's like, it's got this proliferation of names. And despite all the names, there are only two stories that come out of Derry. There's only two stories that people know about Derry. People on one side know the story of the siege in the Jacobite Wars, in the wars against for William of Orange. It was besieged. The establishment wanted to open the gates and let the army in and evacuate the city, and the apprentice boys closed those gates and shouted, "No surrender," which is like still a kind of massive meme in Northern Irish politics. In fact, literally, if you put "no surrender" into YouTube at the moment, there's a very, very crazy woman who was screaming "no surrender" at Belfast Town Hall during all that stuff about the flag. Have you seen that? You can find her in The Shining, in Pulp Fiction, in Harry Potter. "No surrender!" She's still there, right? And then the other side, though, is the story of Bloody Sunday. And they're the only two stories that really matter in Derry. And I thought, well, going on what I've just said about changing the story, wouldn't it be great to go to Derry and put on a massive event around a different story? And Derry was founded by St. Columba, or St. Columkill, who's also got two names. And St. Columba, fantastically, is his life story by Admanan is the first recorded sighting of the Loch Ness Monster. So it's like a really easy show to put together. We just bought this huge Loch Ness Monster up the foil. Who wouldn't love that? And we put on this show that was like, it was quite complicated. It was like almost the opposite of the Olympics, where everybody was watching something at the same time. It was a show that took place over 30 hours all around the city, and you had to you had to sort of collect your tokens. You had to kind of orienteer your way through the show, which was incredibly potent in Derry because for a very long time, you couldn't walk from one part of the city to the other. There were parts of the city where you couldn't walk. The walls, the famous walls, were sealed off completely during the Troubles, and you wouldn't walk from that area to that area. So this sort of walking event was this celebration of the fact that the city was suddenly open. So that the active walking became part of the story. And then it all climaxed with the Loch Ness Monster. And I'm going to show you just like a little news clip. It's just the easiest way to see it all. It's like a 2-minute clip. So can we see that now?
Well, Londonderry was the place to be at the weekend. Tens of thousands were there for a festival billed as the return of Colmkill. The biggest outdoor event of the City of Culture year featured a spectacular battle on the foil between Colmkill and a fire-breathing Loch Ness Monster. Mark McFadden reports.
A war between good and evil, a battle between light and dark. The struggle between Ireland's great missionary saint and the world's most famous monster. Colmkill had hometown advantage, so the result was never really in doubt. But this was an event that really put City of Culture year on the international map. Spectacular in every sense. It was a festival that took over the city for 2 days, turning streets into theatres, parks into concerts, and the river into a pyrotechnic battlefield.
Derry is really up for it, you know? I walked back across that bridge last night wondering whether there were going to be anybody here to watch the arrival, and I think there were 18,000 people. We couldn't get down this road, we had to come round. That was supposed to be a quiet little intimate overture, and then it just went crazy, and then the square was full and the streets are full. If you were trying to promote Derry, you couldn't wish for better images to be going around the world than these peerless blue skies and these happy crowds. So it's going to change the image of Derry, surely.
The People's Procession was a chance to revel in some of Derry's quirkier historical icons. Amelia Earhart, the pioneer aviator who landed in Derry after flying the Atlantic. The killer whale, nicknamed Dopey Dick, who swam up the Foyle and made a temporary home here. And no show in Derry would be complete without the city's unofficial ambassadors of rock, the Undertones.
Someone said, imagine you just turned up in a city and this was happening. What a fantastic feeling you'd have. So it was brilliant.
I don't think Derry's ever seen a day or a couple of days quite like it.
No, absolutely not. And a very special year. I think this is a very special weekend.
And as darkness fell, tens of thousands lined the riverbank, craning for a view. The weekend was all building up to the battle between the saint and the sinner. The huge Loch Ness monster menaced the city, but Derry met darkness with light. The finale, fireworks lighting up the river and searchlights beaming the Peace Bridge to a cloudless sky. Mark McFadden, UTV Live, Derry.
I needed to establish a link between Loch Foyle and the Loch Ness monster because obviously people don't know. A lot of people, you'll be horrified to read this, learn this, but there are people who don't read Medieval Lives of the Saints and are unaware of Columbkill's exploits among the Picts. So we made a fake Loch Ness monster sighting. We put it on YouTube, but it was in the foil. You know, we'd seen the Loch Ness monster in the foil, and it was pretty good. You can look it up. And it was there for about a week. We had 1.5 million hits. And it's like an amazing thing, you know. And I was thinking, like, how weird would it be for St. Columba to know that we were promoting his story through YouTube and digital and with Twitter and all that path straight from the... Because the story of St. Columba, for those who don't know, is that he was a brilliant scribe. And he went to visit his mentor, St. Finian, who had this beautiful Psalter, a book of Psalms, absolutely beautiful. And Columba saw it and thought, that's fantastic. And when Finian went to bed, started to copy it out, which he could do because his fingers glowed when he wrote. His fingers literally were luminescent when he wrote. So over the course of 10 nights, he copied this exquisite illuminated manuscript. And when St. Finian found out, he went mental. It was basically, this is the medieval equivalent of an illegal download. This is my book. Just that we're at the cusp there of something really important about books, you know? This is my book, this book is my object. And Columba going, no, this is data, this is content, this is, you know, I can pass this on, I can reproduce this. And they went to King Dermot, who ruled against Columba. He said, very famous ruling, to every cow its calf, to every book its copy. And he made Columba give it back to St. Finian. And Columba, who was like, you know, thoughtful, temperate person, basically organised a war. And there was the Battle of Culdremna where 3,000 men died, all on St. Finian's side. Nobody died on St. Columba's side. And St. Columba said, you see, this is a sign from God that I'm right. But Ireland is full of much wiser people than that. And they went, we don't think God did that. We think you did that. And we're going to excommunicate you. And that was commuted to exile. And he went to live on Iona. And he formed this scriptorium. He took 12 men to Iona. And he formed this scriptorium, which became responsible for the most beautiful books in the world. The book, the Lindisfarne Gospel, the Book of Kells. They all grow out of this thing. This terrible disaster produced this amazing renaissance, which is a fantastically inspiring story and really right for Northern Ireland. So it's this story about the transmission of a book, and I was really sort of fascinated by that. So a book was at the centre of this thing, and this is something I want to say. This big sort of cabaret show with the undertones in it, and you know, special effects and the Loch Ness monster. It's intimately connected with a book, right? And so was the Olympic opening ceremony. That section that you've just watched was inspired is too loose a word. It was drawn from a book by Humphrey Jennings called Pandemonium, and we call that section Pandemonium. Do people know about this book? It's an amazing book. Humphrey Jennings was a great filmmaker in the Second World War. He made propaganda films like Listen to Britain is the one that I was sort of first drawn to. But he also made a wonderful film called The Silent Village, which was shot in South Wales in a sort of little pit town in South Wales. And while he was there, Jennings thought, well, I need to repay these people for their hospitality. So he started to give lectures on the Industrial Revolution. They made their own fun in there. There was no telly. And that became this book, this amazing book, because it's not a book that he sat down and wrote. He collected this book. It's a book that Jennings made these films that were like collages and montages, and he wanted this book to be like an unmakeable movie. So it's the story of the Industrial Revolution, but it's in diary extracts, in poems, in bills and receipts and letters and newspaper cuttings, and they just all kind of piece together. And they fire sparks of each other. And I swear, when you pick this book up, it sort of throbs. You can feel the clank of machinery in this book. It really kind of makes the Industrial Revolution visceral. And when we first started talking about the rings, visceral is Danny's watchword. It was like, you have to produce an image of the Olympic rings in the first few minutes. And what people usually do is spend a lot of money on fireworks and make it look spectacular. And Danny's thing was, well, we haven't got that money. How do you make it visceral? Visceral is Danny's big watchword. And basically, you do that by watching the rings being made. That's the most sort of exciting thought that you had. And the minute he said that, I thought of Humphrey Jennings' book, which I had because someone gave it me as a present. Julian Temple gave it me as a present. And I thought, I'll get Danny a copy. And so I went on ABE Books, I think, and I found a copy. And it's been out of print for donkey's years. So this book cost me about 50 quid or something like that for this rubbish paperback. So I was generous enough to buy it for him. But I was not generous enough not to mention how much it was. So I went, here's this book. Danny went, oh, because we always buy each other books. And there's a book. And he went, oh, thanks very much. He went, no, it costs 50 quid. You've got to read it. Read it now! So he read it, and that became this amazing inspiration for this astonishing thing, right? And this book that began as a series of lectures, well, began as diary entries of the 19th century, but began as a book in a miners' institute in South Wales during the Second World War as a series of talks, became this huge multimedia, Twittery, internet, global phenomenon of an event. And that pathway, I think, is really important. Two things about that pathway are important. One is it starts with a book. I think it's really important, and I'll say why in a second. And two, the importance of gifts in that story. You know, that was a gift. Those talks were a gift from Humphrey Jennings to those miners. That book was a gift from a friend to me, and a gift from me to Danny. And I think the thing about working in the industry sometimes is that things are very determined. You know, we have a meeting, and what's the outcome of that meeting? And the thing about a gift or a present is that you've no idea what's going to happen with it. They're going to wear it, or they're going to throw it in a cupboard. It's going to end up on a shelf. It's going to give it to somebody else. You've no idea where that's going to end up. And those streams are really important, I think. Maria Miller recently talked about the value, the economic value of culture, which I'm sure is true, and I'm sure it's really important, but it completely misunderstands how culture happens. She actually talked about Warhorse, and I've mentioned Michael Morpurgo before. She talked about Warhorse, which was this, you know, it's now a big West End hit, and people come to pay for it. But how did Warhorse start? Warhorse started decades ago with Michael Morpurgo inviting children back to his farm, you know, and letting them play on his farm, and noticing a kid who couldn't talk to people but somehow did relate to this horse. And, you know, and then it was a book that he wrote, and nobody writes those books for instant money, you know. And all those streams, those decades, that long, slow process of giving and winnowing and pleasure and sharing, that's what creates a culture. Not having a meeting to design a West End show, because it wouldn't have happened. If you do that, you end up with Viva Forever. Or Viva 6 weeks or whatever. And in all those stories that I've told you about, whether it's Derry or whether it's the Olympics, the other thing, because I was in the bar before, I noticed how young so many of you are. Young like policemen. That like a really important part of this, both those stories, is friendship. You know, when Danny put together that team to do the Olympic opening ceremony, he could have asked anybody in the world. You know, he could have asked any writer in the world, any designer in the world. He could have asked any composer in the world, and he asked Rick Smith from Underworld. And Rick is a genius. You've just heard his music. You know, he wrote this astonishing percussion concerto for Dame Evelyn Glennie, which is just an astonishing piece of music, I think. Amazing piece of music. Who knew that that was in Rick? Rick's biggest hit was Lager, 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 Shout, Shout, Shout. but friendship and loyalty who takes you places that kind of prestige and genius don't. So all those young people who are here tonight, if you've got each other, that's such a big thing. The undertones, you know, just brothers and friends. You know, people do their best work with their friends, I think. People, you know, this isn't controversial. Stevie Wonder is colossally more gifted than John Lennon in every single way, but Paul McCartney did not do his best work with Stevie Wonder. He really didn't. So friendship is really important, I'm watching this clock and I have to finish. So I'm going to wrap this up, and then we can have questions. But what I wanted to say was books, right? Whatever medium, and we've talked about the fact that I had to wear a hard hat for years. We've done YouTube things and internet-y things and all kinds of things. Books are so central to it. And I think there's a really, really, really specific reason for that, which is that all the really great ideas never come from the core. They always come from the margin, from the edge, or nearly always come from the margin, from the edge, from the disenfranchised, from the eccentric, from the people who are not good in the room, right? And all of these things that I've shown you, the Olympics opening ceremony, or a movie, or a theatre play, or a pop song, it takes a certain... I've worked a lot in films, and I've worked a lot in big events. It takes a certain kind of person to make those things work. You've got to be incredibly self-confident. You've got to have no ego whatsoever. You've got to be cunning. You've got to be articulate. You've got to be able to take it. You've probably got to have a good bedrock of really solid relationships at home, so it doesn't matter what happens in the room. All those things. That's a really, really, really specific type of person. A really, you know, well-adjusted, self-confident person like me. But books can be written by anybody, you know? Like some of the most important books in the world were written by slaves, were written by psychopaths, were written by people in prison. You could probably put a list of the top 5 most important books in the world ever together, and it would all be by people in prison. Don Quixote, Pinocchio, you know, the Darkness at Noon, Pilgrim's Progress. See, I'm just doing it off the top of my head. Only books really capture those voices. Only books really have all the voices. Everything else is kind of translation, but the books have all the voices in the raw. And so all these ideas, from whatever medium you come from, it starts with the book, and it begins with the book, and the book is the nursery and the seedbed. So I'm going to end there, I think. I'm going to end with a quote from a book, a quote from George Orwell, because this is what I kept saying to people in Derry when they were talking about yes, that's why I wanted to say this. Because going back to, so beautifully crafted speech. You didn't mess anything up. Henri Gustave Mollison, that thing of like having no memory. Sometimes, and I'm not being crusty about this because there's things about this that I love, sometimes I look at our culture and I look at celebrity magazines or reality TV, and it seems to me like a version of Henri Gustave Mollison, that I can see something that's going through the motions and has the kind of macabre, galvanic twitchings of some kind of ghostly memory of what a story should be in it. You know, it's like it should have a row in it, so let's have one. You know, it should have a betrayal in it, so let's do one. It should have sex in it, so let's have some. But like not any of it really adds up. And it is like that, I think. And I think it's up to... I don't know who you are, but God bless you. Right, and I mean, I think there's a place for all that, and it's not the whole picture, certainly, but it's real, and it is a danger, and I think it's up to you to keep replenishing and passing on that fund of stories the way Anna did. I'll end with George Orwell, who said, nothing ever stands still. We must increase or decrease. We must add to our heritage or lose it. So there you go. And I think Hannah are going to pass around microphones now if people have got questions. Is that right? Oh, hey, I've got one.
To St Columba, the warmongering St Columba became a publishing mogul. I want to know what happened to St Finian.
To St Finian?
To St Finian.
I think he was old, you know. I think he was just...
He just died.
Got depressed. He was the guy who wanted him excommunicated. And I think St Brendan said, no, they were all saints, you know. Said, no, come on, leave it, Finian, it's not worth it. So he went to Iona, and we began that, I'll just tell you this, that we began that show on the Friday night, because it went through a whole weekend, with a coracle that 12 people, including 2 or 3 quite, like, what I would call looked after children, rode all the way from Iona to Derry. It was an amazing thing. And sadly, they arrived a day early and we had to hide them in Lisa Halley docks. They were really unhappy. But when they came down the foil, this was the thing that I referred to in the interview, that we thought this was like quiet little ceremony of welcome for them. We had the mayor and we had a few acrobats and a little bit of a choir. And we thought this would be quite a quiet little thing. And 18,000 people were there. And we were like, oh, God, we haven't really got much of a show for them. You've got this little boat turns up. That's it. And in fact, what happened was, and this is a thing, again, going back to Henri Gustave Mollison's brain, and that we are much more complicated than we think we are, and we're marshalling all kinds of things that we don't know, and no matter how carefully you tool a story, you can't really manipulate people the way you think you can. As they came to the jetty, the lead guy was carrying a book that everybody sort of knew from the papers, that the children of Iona had compiled. It was like the Book of Iona to bring back to Derry, just a scrapbook. As they got to the jetty, he just lifted it up, and these 18,000 people just went mental. It was a scrapbook. But I think it was like they knew that these guys had rowed 110 miles, and that they were crossing a finish line. It felt like the Olympics. They went berserk. It was just fantastic. And that was enough of a show, you know. So there you go. There's a question up here. I have to keep pointing to the camera, right?
This is my first time at the conference, and I'm relatively new to this, but it's not a very original question, but I just wondered, how do you get into the mindset of writing for children? Do you sort of go quite childlike yourself, or do you revert back to your own children?
Yeah, it's my own. I mean, well, to be honest, like that's my taste in books. You know, I love children's books. They're the books that I'd always prefer. And how I became a children's writer, as opposed to a writer, is that I'd written the script Millions, and Danny Boyle was directing it. And just after we got green lit, which is like quite a way out from production, but you know you're going to make the film, we went out for dinner together, and we were talking about books, and Danny was talking about the books that he was reading. You know, it's a fantastic new tome about the gas pipeline in Kazakhstan or something like that, you know. And I would be sitting there going, Millie Molly Mandy really underestimated that. And he went, well, why have you not written a children's book? And I went, I've just never had an idea. And Millie's is about 2 little boys who find a bag of money, and he went, isn't 2 little boys who find a bag of money quite a good idea for a book? Because it took me like 6 years to get that film made. I could have written a book. So he said, I think you should write it now, because it would have to come out before the film. Otherwise, it was the film of the book, which is rubbish. So I went home and literally went home and started writing. It was quite late, and I started writing straight away. So that's kind of what made me think, But it was more realising that I already thought quite childishly.
So are we to expect a lot more children's books from you in the future?
Oh yeah, that's all I want to do.
Excellent.
That's it. Everything else is just annoying.
Thank you.
It's a distraction. Everything else is just meetings.
You've just been saying that children's books are the things that you really want to do. Everything else is annoying, just meetings. I'm imagining that the writing a book is a relatively solitary experience, but also you have spoken or written very eloquently about the quality of the collaborative experience that you had in making the Olympic opening ceremony.
Yeah.
Could you describe your ideal collaborative process?
Oh gosh, that's great. Well, actually, it was that ceremony because Danny got together a team of people who had different skills. The core team was very small. It was myself, Danny, Mark Tilsley, who's an amazing set designer / builder. He's someone who thinks by making things. Anne Sutirat Lalab, who was a costume-based person, and Rick. So what's that, 5? So that's all there was. You know, right the way through, that was a sort of stable core. None of us kept our job description, you know, for a second. He banned me from bringing my laptop in because he didn't want me writing stuff up straight away. He wanted just to be able to talk. It was Mark who designed the Queen thing, you know, the section with the Queen. Everyone thinks, because it's sort of so written, I always get the credit for that. Mark, who's the set guy, came in with that one day. Sutirat developed those amazing dove bikes. And it was just that brilliant thing of knowing that you've all got these skills, but that there were no divisions between those skills. That was really wonderful.
Did you have an executive producer?
No.
Good. Thank you.
Well, not that I ever met. I mean, maybe Danny might have been defending us from all kinds of people that we didn't know. And do you know what was really important? Do you know what? This sounds like a really trivial thing. We had this room, and it was really basic, and we had a kettle. And when you work in film a lot, there's a lot of, like, you know, someone comes in and goes to get you coffee. Or do you know what I mean? Like in that Soho setup, where like some young intern will come in and say, "I'm just going for coffee." It's going to be like, and we didn't have, because we were right out in Bromley. We had to make tea for each other, and we had to bring our food in and stuff like that. And I think that business of looking after each other turned out to be really, really important. Anna was talking before about how small those crews were that made those fantastic programs, and there was something about having to take care of each other a bit that was really good. It was quite funny when people from the government came and we asked them if they wanted coffee. And they'd be like, "Yes, I'll have a double dip." And I go, "Oh, well, this is just a kettle." Because that's teapot. I know there are other questions, but I was going to crave your indulgence and just end by reading something. Is that all right? And I'm sorry about, and I do wish I wasn't running for the train because I'm having such a great time. But this is sort of about what I was talking about wonder and about opening your horizons and having more stories. And this is a story about a boy called Liam who has one of those enormous growing spurts just before he goes to big school. He puts on a huge amount of, it's based on a friend of my son's who used to knock on the door and go, "Hello, is Benedict playing out?" And then knocked on the door one day and it was like, this like giant mutant version with stubble and everything. He's standing in the door going, "Hello, is Benedict playing out?" And he was really unhappy about it. He's called Luke, God bless him. And and the dad in the book says, "Look, 6 inches isn't a spurt, it's a mutation." And so, well, I'll just read it. This is what happens on his first day at school. You need to know that he lives in a part of Liverpool where I live called Waterloo. And obviously there are places called Waterloo all over the world. And because it's not a primary school, I don't have to ask you why. I don't have to put your hand up and tell you you're clever. I just assume you know why places are called Waterloo, okay? And you're not going to shout out Waterloo Road, ha ha ha. Okay. I love that, Regents. On my very first day at Waterloo High, I was the tallest person on the lower school site. The new uniform Mum had bought at the beginning of the summer didn't fit me anymore, and they had to send off for an extra large lower school blazer. I got a special dispensation to wear my own clothes for the first half term. When we went to get my travel pass for the bus to school, the woman in the office would not believe I was school age. I had to go home, get my birth certificate. And next morning when I showed the bus pass to the bus driver, she wouldn't believe it was my bus pass. I had to get off the bus and text my mum. She came down and explained to the driver that I was just unusually tall for my age. It's not the height, love, said the driver, it's the stubble. When I got to school, Mrs. Sass, the head, saw me in reception and said, "Oh, Tom." And I said, "No, Liam." And she said, "Yes, of course. I'm Lorraine. Come this way." And I do remember thinking, fancy her telling me her first name. Isn't that friendly? She took me to the staff room and she started telling me the first names of all the teachers. And they all shook hands with me and said that they were pleased to meet me. And I was thinking, well, what a polite school. What a polite school. Do they do this in every new kid? And then she said, "Everybody, this is Liam Middleton, our new head of media studies." And I know I should have put her right there and then, but someone gave me a mug of coffee and a custard cream and sat me down in a nice big chair, and I thought, well, I'll tell them after the biscuit. So that's how I ended up on stage, standing just behind Lorraine, while she talked to the whole school. There were 8 people in the front row who knew me from Joan of Arc Primary, including Florida Kirby, who kept waving and making faces. Lorraine said everybody was welcome. She hoped everyone had a good summer. She said something about the registration procedure. And then she said, "And now I'm going to introduce you to a new member of staff. He'll be teaching media studies. He'll be the form tutor for Class 9 Mandela. This is Mr. Middleton." And she pointed at me. And I stepped up to the microphone and I said, "Thanks, Lorraine." And all these faces were looking up at me, and part of me was thinking, I really need to think more about the consequences of my actions, and then stuff like this wouldn't happen. But another part of me was thinking, this is good. I said, "Good morning, everybody." And everybody said, "Good morning, sir." If you're at school, you'd be compelled to do that. I said, "Good morning, everybody." And everybody said, "Good morning, sir, thank you." "Has anyone here been to Waterloo near Liverpool?" I said. And 1,200 hands shot up and waggled in the air like a salute. And looking out across them, I felt like the bad emperor in Star Wars. I said, "Has anyone here been to Waterloo in Belgium, scene of the original Battle of Waterloo in 1815? No one had. I said, "What about Waterloo in Siberia? Siberia is the same size as Europe. It's got the biggest freshwater lake in the world. The ice on it is so thick they run railway lines across it. There's also a town called Waterloo there. Has anyone been to Waterloo in Siberia?" No one put their hand up. Why not? No one answered, but they all squirmed in their seats as though going to Siberia had been homework and they'd forgotten to do it. "What about Waterloo in Sierra Leone? Sierra Leone's got a lush rainforest and an amazing history. Has anyone been there?" No. Why? They squirmed again. Why? Why have we all been to the Waterloo at the bypass, the Waterloo at the shopping precinct, and none of us been to the Waterloo at the waterfall, the Waterloo in the jungle, the Waterloo by the frozen lake? These places are not in Narnia. They're in our world. You don't need a magic wardrobe to get to them. You can go to them on the bus. Obviously, it would take a lot of buses. And someone shouted, "Yes!" And I was amazed to see it wasn't one of the children, it was Lorraine. And I realise now that Lorraine thought I was being metaphorical. She thought I was going to say something about how education opens up new worlds. But I didn't say that. I said, "Let's go!" No one moved. They thought I was being metaphorical too. I said, "What are we doing here? Follow me!" I don't know where this bit came from. It was just part of my flow. I walked out down the middle of the hall towards the doors at the back. It took a minute, but someone followed me, and someone else, and someone else, and someone else, and everyone followed me out of the hall, through the lower school exit and into the playground. The sun was shining, the birds were singing. I walked up to the gates and pushed. Nothing happened. Waterloo is a high-security school. The gates are locked at 9 o'clock. You can't get in or out without a swipe card. Which is why there was a man in a leather jacket on the other side of the gates talking into the intercom saying, "You've got to let me in, I'm the new head of media studies." And why the secretary was saying, "I don't understand, you're already here, you're taking assembly." By then, Lorraine was at the gates. She looked at the new head of media studies, she looked at me, she said, "Who are you?" I said, "Look, I'm really sorry, Lorraine." She said, "Don't call me Lorraine anymore. I am Mrs. Sass." Okay.
I know you've got to run.